Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1:30 Eastern Time, and we're going to start our cultural competency facilitated webinar. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm going to introduce Ken Spiro, the founder of ELS, and he will kick us off today.
Thank you, Brian. As you mentioned, my name is Ken Spiro, CEO of Ed Leadership Sims. And on behalf of Brian and all of our team, I wanted to welcome you to our webinar today. And thank you all for joining. We'd like to also wish you and your families all the best in navigating this current crisis, both safely and healthfully, as well as to your extended school communities. Our schools are on the front line of this situation, engaging and educating our children of all ages, and we at ELS would like to support that effort in any way that we can. Our specific focus is on supporting the adults, the leaders in our schools, to both help them, on the one hand, to make better decisions, and on the other hand, to develop the resilience to also deal with the consequences or blowback that always follows those choices. Furthermore, we also want to enable them to keep their teams engaged and connected. Online simulations are a unique tool to help with both of these objectives. First, they harness the power in the adage that experience is the best teacher. We know that, allowing us to manufacture experiences so that they can be done in a scalable way around real problems of practice in a realistic and authentic context that allow participants to manage them, including making mistakes, but without the risk, so they can learn from them. Second, because of the story basis and authenticity of the narratives, they are engaging and even fun and can provoke meaningful conversation and collaboration amongst teams and students so that the peer-to-peer interaction builds connectedness even when done virtually and even asynchronously. We find this to be a critical element, especially now with the shelter-in-place requirements and potential for isolation and depression amongst our leaders, teachers, staffs, and graduate students. So with all that in mind, we hope that you find the session both engaging and interesting and look forward to your feedback. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. David DeYoung, who is the head of the Superintendent Development Program at the University of South Dakota and has been using the simulations with his cohorts for the last several years. Dr. DeYoung has been a teacher, principal, and superintendent, and I will turn things over to him.
All right, thank you so much, Ken and Brian. I'm glad to be part of this cultural competency simulation, and just glad that you're a part of it as well. So right now, I am an assistant professor, and I'm the superintendent program coordinator at the University of South Dakota. So before this, I was a teacher, coach, principal, and superintendent in Iowa, and now I'm in my 5th year in higher education. During my first year in higher education, I went to a conference, a national conference, and I came across these simulations, and in the first 10 minutes, I realized these are the best tools out there for current and aspiring school leaders. And I have to tell you, after 4 years of facilitating these hundreds of times to thousands of school leaders across the country, honestly, I'm only more impressed by them. And I'm just excited that you're here today and I get to show you one. So we're going to do 4 different things today. First, we got our introductions out of the way. Next, we're going to talk about why we chose this simulation. Then I'm going to tell you a few key points about simulations and what I've learned. And then we're going to experience one together. So cultural competency is the title of this simulation, and we have 30 in our library for you to choose from. And we chose this one because it addresses the 5 most critical components of cultural competency. So the simulation, we might not be able to finish it in this webinar, but it touches on conversations about worldview, about differences in culture, about different practices and giving it good knowledge base. It gives you practice with cultural skills and about handling encounters about cultural differences. And it's hard for me, I think about this as a professor of school leadership. Sometimes it might be hard to have these conversations. And what I have found, and one of the reasons I love simulations so much, is that we can have those conversations within the simulation. So that's why we chose this one today. I hope you enjoy it. Next, whenever I frame up or whenever I begin a simulation, I always go through the same conversation at the beginning. I say something like, in the next 45 minutes, we are going to experience a simulation together. This is a risk-free environment. We're going to try different approaches, and this is going to give you, the participant, an experience without any real-world consequence that comes along with difficult choices that we have to make. So this is not a time for you to answer in a way that you're trying to figure out what the simulation wants you to answer. It's more about authentic leadership situations. So that's how I always frame it up, and people are like, all right, I'll listen to that for a while, and they come away usually thinking it was one of the best things that they've done in a long time. So there are different ways to facilitate these simulations. Right now, you are experiencing one on GoToMeeting synchronously, but there are all different ways that I've tried to facilitate them and that our users have tried. They work great for a large group of participants. So if I'm getting in front of a large group of people synchronously, like in the same room, what I'll do is I'll have a projector up, one good sound system, and my computer, and that's all I really need. And the simulation will, as we go through it, I'll break up the participants in the room into groups of 2 at each discussion point, and you can really make a large group feel small with these simulations. Also, if you can use these as like a small group of participants, it works really well to have little teams experience the simulations. They can be in the same room, or even better if they're in separate rooms, and they can go through the simulations at their own self-pace. Now, one huge advantage of these simulations is to do them synchronously. So as a leader, when I have school superintendents coming to my class, they're either driving in from all over the region, I'm like, oh, I better bring my A game. I better be ready to have them talk to each other and have those organic peer-to-peer conversations and really go deep. And that's one thing that I want to take advantage of with all the busy adult learners. And asynchronously, so I've been teaching this class online, fully online, for 4 years now. I'm teaching it right now. Today, this morning, I was teaching it. And school leaders experience it on their own, and then they come to the discussion board, and then they post about what they learned. And they'll say things like, I tried the simulation 3, 4, 5 different times, and to go through the different paths in the simulation and learn from it. And I'm like, oh, that's great. If we have busy leaders that are absolutely, using their time and they're engaged in what's going on, I'm like, yes, we got them. These are highly engaging. And then I've facilitated these on GoToMeeting or Zoom as well. So eventually, especially in today's environment, these are fantastic if you're finishing out your course for the end of the year, if you're as a school superintendent and you still want to give professional learning to your team, if you want to carve out an hour and just lead your admin team or a group of aspiring leaders through this virtually, you can do that, just like we're going to do today. Now, a few things that you'll notice that I wanted to talk about. So each simulation begins with a few minutes of context. That's normal, and you're going to experience that today as well. Now, each of the decision points, since we're doing it via GoToMeeting, we're going to use polls. So a poll is going to show up on your screen. You're going to be able to choose how you want to answer to that poll. And based on your responses, that's how we're going to navigate the simulation today, which is exciting to me. And there's also value in talking about the good decisions, the option that you choose, and the ones that you don't choose. And I hope to model that for you as well today. Now, this specific simulation, seeing these characters makes me smile. So in the top left-hand corner, you're gonna have a parent that comes and complains about Mr. Henton, the teacher. So it's just like you're a high school principal, and this parent comes to your office and complains about the teacher. Now, a little bit later on the top right-hand corner, another parent comes and complains about Mr. Henton, the teacher. And any school leader knows that when it rains, it pours. If you start to hear complaints about a teacher, it will just keep coming and piling on. And the bottom left-hand corner is actually Mr. Henton, and we'll get to meet him as well, hopefully today. Now, in the top middle of this right here, you'll see an icon, and you'll see that we have an email that will pop up. So just like a normal day, we're going to get interrupted with an email. And then finally, the feedback report in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm not sure if we'll get to it today, but at the bottom of every, or at the back end of every simulation, there's a feedback report that helps you talk about the discussion and talk about the decision, and really helps the facilitator lead a reflection about the simulation. So that's what we're going to see today. Now, specifically with GoToMeeting, you have a hand raise feature. You can see my blue line showing you that. If you have any questions at any time, raise your hand, and we will be happy to unmute you or answer a question that you have. Also, on the right-hand side, you'll see a chat feature. I'm going to ask, if you're willing, just please to type in what you're thinking, a question that you might have, and especially at the decision points, I'd love to hear what you're thinking and why. And so that's what we're going to use specifically with GoToMeeting. So thanks for your time today. I know this is such, we're just in unprecedented times, and we are going to experience a simulation together here. All right, I'm going to switch to Firefox. And now we are already in our simulation. So this simulation is called Cultural Competency, and it was actually made in a partnership with Gwinnett County Public Schools. And I wanted to point that out because you as a users on your end, I want you to start thinking about simulations that you would like to see added to our library, and talk to either Brian or Ken or myself, and we'd love to partner with you. And this is a product of one of those partnerships today. This screen is just going to tell us that we can't go backwards in this simulation. If we want to start over, if we want to go back, we literally have to start over at the beginning. So it's meant to give you an experience. And our next slide right here is going to start with our narrator that gives you your context. So our simulation is about to begin.
Welcome to the Cultural Competency Simulation. In this activity, you will play the role of a new principal facing several leadership challenges. This simulation provides a context for addressing cultural competency within a school community. The simulation will take you through various stakeholders and data points to consider as you make decisions on how to proceed. Be sure to respond authentically to each situation, as there is no right or wrong answer. You have just completed your first month as the newly appointed principal of Waterside School. To better address changing demographics, the school district has recently realigned its mission to creating high-quality learning experiences that meet the needs of every child. Within your first 30 days as the principal, you have reviewed local school data, observed teaching and learning throughout the building, and spoken to community members and school stakeholders. The PTA is a strong part of the school community. The PTA chair, Mrs. Ashley Roberts, has been in the role for the past 3 years. She is a sounding board for parents as they navigate the school community. She is also an avid supporter of the teaching staff and works to ensure that they have the necessary resources to provide effective instruction. Many of the staff bring a great sense of spirit to the school, especially Mr. Thomas Henton. Mr. Henton is a popular veteran teacher who actively participates in school community events and is well liked by students and staff. Your mentor, Sabrina Fisher, is an experienced principal within the district. You meet with her to share your experiences and insights. As you meet with your mentor, Sabrina Fisher, to reflect on your first 30 days, you share your initial thoughts about the academic state as well as the culture of Waterside. During classroom visits, you notice that the gifted courses lack student diversity, while the academic intervention courses were largely populated with students of color. Teaching practices do not seem to have changed much among veteran teaching staff in the face of growing diversity. In speaking with groups of students, you find that they believe they are not being challenged and that learning activities are not relevant to their future success. In fact, there seems to be some inequity in terms of learning opportunities for students and a lack of cultural competency on the part of teachers. In talking with parents, you learn that some are concerned with the way that the school is changing and believe that their child should learn in an environment that was similar to theirs when they attended Waterside. You quickly notice the strength of the school, that students are eager to learn. You share with your mentor that you know you have a lot of work to do in creating a culture and academic environment that will ensure the success of each child. After meeting with your mentor, you settle into your office and glance at your inbox. A few emails stand out.
All right, this email is from Dr. Hidalgo, who is our superintendent. And it reads, to follow up on our conversation a few weeks ago, I am excited that you are leading the school towards our vision of effectively supporting every child and improving cultural diversity and equality with academic rigor and cultural competency in our curriculum. As we discussed, the significant shift within the district's demographics presents a major challenge in terms of balancing the needs and perspectives of our legacy families with those who are new to the school and coming from different cultural backgrounds. Within the community, some parents are expressing concerns regarding perceived discrepancies in grading, discipline, and expectations in the classroom setting between students from our traditional population and those who have recently migrated here. I'd like you to identify some of the challenges specific to your school with regard to these disconnects. Check back with me later in the quarter to discuss what support may be needed from me. Here's another email. This comes from the PTA chair. Just wanted to touch base on the upcoming Cultural Diversity Fair next week. The plans are set and we are on for next Tuesday afternoon at 6:30 p.m. Also, I wanted to mention to you how much we appreciate working with Mr. Henton over the last few weeks. He's a vibrant member of the school community, and he plays such a significant role in leading several activities in our after-school events. And he keeps everyone in stitches. He's so funny.
Now, I haven't investigated this yet. However, I've been hearing some grumblings among the teachers, expressing concerns at the low level of participation of many of the new students. Also, I'm hearing that there have been several discipline issues coming up with Mr. Henton's gifted class. I wonder what's going on there. Anyhow, hope you have a good day.
All right, so now our assistant principal is telling us something different, kind of giving us a heads up that Mr. Henton, something is up.
Hi, this is Mrs. Baldwin. My son Andrew is in Mr. Hinton's social studies class. I really need to talk to you. I'm not happy with the way Mr. Hinton is teaching my son. Clearly, he doesn't believe that my son is capable of learning at a high level, and that's a problem. Call me back as soon as you get this message so I can come in and meet with you.
Hey, I wanted to make sure you got a piece of cake from the party. It's great to celebrate your first 30 days. Latest from the teacher's lounge is grumble about all the new students. I even heard that Mr. Hampton said that he wonders if half of them can even speak English. They never participate in his class. Then he joked that he needs to learn a new language or two. Oh, did you want a piece of cake?
All right, so that's a teacher just stopping by to tell us that.
Which would you focus on first?
All right, this is where we are going to need your help. We need to choose one of these four options on what we would focus on first. So you need to decide on your end, because I'm going to bring up a poll here that gives you the four choices. Number one, meet with the PTA leaders. Number two, review discipline referrals. Number three, arrange a meeting with Mrs. Baldwin. And number four, follow up on Mr. Henton's comments. So wherever you are right now across the world, if you'd be willing to jot down 1, 2, 3, or 4 on a piece of scratch paper, write it down on your phone, some way to remember which option you want, because when I bring the poll up, this screen is going to disappear. All right, get your choice. Which would you do first? All right, I'm launching the poll. Oh, this is awesome. I wish you could see how fast these results are coming in. Excellent. I'm still seeing votes come on in. All right. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4 right now. And what we're going to do is I'm going to close the poll here shortly. And what I would like you to do is I would like you to, this is our time for collaboration for each decision point. Even though we're doing this virtually, I'd like you to use the chat feature that I showed you at the beginning. You can type in, I really like this answer because this, or type in, I did not like an answer because of this. So I'm closing the poll right now and I'm sharing the results. Look at that. We have 14% with number 1 with the PTA leaders, 28% reviewing some data about discipline, 37% to arranging a meeting with Mrs. Baldwin, and 21% follow up with Mr. Henton. So it looks like most people are choosing 3, but this is where I would like to show you. I would like you to use either raise your hand or use the chat feature. Great job, by the way, on that poll. That was awesome. All right. I see some people are typing right now, which is great. I'm going to ask help from Ken and Brian as well, if somebody raises their hand and we'd like to give them a chance to talk about their choice.
Hey, David, this is Brian. I don't see any hands raised right now. I see a few questions, though, versus chat. Do you see those?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, so one member of the group states that she wants to hear from the parent with specifics first.
Yep.
And then one person selected number 3 because it takes me right to the information I need to know prior to meeting with the teacher.
Yes.
And then we also have a response, I would like to follow up with the teacher so that I could get a grip of what is going on and then meet with the parent.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. And that's what I hear when I facilitate that as well in person. I hear a lot of people say when the parent came, when Mrs. Baldwin came and complained to me, I usually try to make that a top priority and drop whatever I have to in order to get back to Mrs. Baldwin. And it seems like my colleagues are going to keep monitoring your questions or your chats. And it seems like we're going to go with number 3. And we're going to see what happens next in our simulation.
In the text box below, describe your rationale for your choice of top priority.
This is a good time when you're facilitating this in person to have a great conversation about which one you would do first.
Before you can act on any priority, you are approached by Mr. Turner, a parent who insists on meeting with you immediately. His daughter was disciplined for disruption in Mr. Henton's gifted class.
My daughter Kira was issued a disciplinary referral and sent to the office on Friday for not having a pencil in Mr. Henton's gifted social studies class. In her last school, my daughter was an honor roll student. She has never, ever been in trouble at school before. Yes, we are new to this school, but we had heard so many good things, and we were really looking forward to the challenges that gifted classes would bring. Instead, in the first month at Waterside, my daughter was issued a disciplinary referral by Mr. Hinton. And when I heard the reason she didn't bring a pencil to class, I almost fell over. This is ridiculous. I heard that Mr. Hinton has lent other students pencils in the past. What is going on?
If what this parent is saying is true, this would be in conflict with discipline guidelines. How will you respond to Mr. Turner's issue?
All right, we have Mr. Turner in our office, and we have 5 different choices. So if you would write down your answer, we're going to go through the same process. If you'd write it down, and then I'll bring up the poll so that way you can answer. Number 1, appease him by noting you will take immediate action. 2, tell him you will investigate and get back to him. 3, ask the parent if he has spoken to Mr. Hinton. 4, delegate to Assistant Principal Griffin. And number 5, pull Mr. Hinton into the meeting right now. I'll reread those if you'd be willing.
So David, we do have a hand raised. It may be referring to the last question, but I can unmute Sharon if you'd like right now.
That'd be great.
Can
Sharon, I
you?
see your hand raised.
Yeah. Oh, I found the chat room. Never mind. I'm good now. I'm a slow learner.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No problem.
All right. I am going to launch the poll, and it's just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay. Oh yeah, the answers are rolling in right now. Great job. One thing that I want to tell you is what I love about this process is when our school leaders have to answer the poll what to do anonymously, you almost always have split decisions. Probably in the simulations of my thousands of people that have responded to multiple decision points, 95% of the time there are split decisions. And there's a split decision right here. I'm going to close the poll, share the results. So number 2, remember, is tell him we will investigate and get back to him. And number 3 is ask the parent if he has spoken directly to Mr. Hinton. And number 4 is delegate this to our assistant principal. So I am going to hide the results right now. And we are back. And if you would be willing to add either a question or in your chat feature, right now, explain, this is our collaboration time, explain what you chose and why it worked for you or why you wanted it, or say, I did not like number 1 or number 5 because of this. All right, I see a few people asking. I don't see the chat box again. I see only questions. It's totally appropriate for you just to add what letter you thought in the question box. That's what we can all see right now. Perfect. Since I'm not that familiar with Mr. Hinton, I didn't want to encourage Mr. Turner to talk to him directly for fear of what Mr. Turner might say. Oh, that is excellent. Because we don't know who's the issue here. Is it Mr. Hinton or not? All right, number 2, good. I like to talk to people and investigate before making decisions. Oh, great response. Chose number 3 because the parent didn't appear to be too unreasonable. Sometimes just talking to the teacher, misconceptions can be clarified. Excellent. Ooh, torn between 2 and 3, because ultimately It went to 2 because of the previous poll and wanted to look in the referrals to see how big of an issue this is. Don't make assumptions. That's a good response too. I'd like to find out what Mr. Henton's procedures are in his class. Oh, these are such great comments that you're making right now. Thanks for doing that. And it seems, if my memory is correct, it seems the highest percentage is number 3. Now, when I facilitate these in classrooms, I always get about this point, and I want to encourage when people are talking directly to each other in a one-on-one format. I love it when they change their response. Like they said, oh, I started with 2, but when I listened to my colleague here, I changed to 3. And I said, that's like real life, because we all need mentors as school leaders. And I just really build them up so that way they seek advice before they make decisions. Oh, wonderful. Few more I'm going to read. Better to get to your own understanding of the situation and make no assumptions. Yes. I'd be leering of sending the parent to Mr. Henton. Yeah, we need to work with parents to go to teachers first before I get involved. Yeah. A lot of times issues can be handled. Yeah. I was a school leader. At about year 3, I was bone weary of trying to solve everybody's problems. I felt like I was pretty good at it. And I needed to equip other people to solve their own problems. Ooh, another person I don't like 3 because I don't want to encourage parents confronting teachers. Great thought. Sometimes we don't want parents to go to certain teachers. Yes, and we're not quite sure how risky is it to send them back to Mr. Henton. That's a theme right now. It's a great theme. We're going to roll with number 3. Now, I know that we have almost, it's really close between 2 and 3, but this is how we're rolling.
Mr. Turner says, no, I have not spoken with Mr. Henton. I came to you so this issue could be resolved by the leader of this school. I expect to hear from you by the end of day, or I will tell others what is happening at this school.
Ooh, he did not like that response. That always gets a chuckle out of the participants.
You get an email from the PTA chair giving you a heads up. Mr. Turner has already called her and complained about Mr. Henton. As the day goes on, you realize you won't have much time to look into the discipline issue. You send Mr. Turner a quick email noting you are working on it, and then ask AP Griffin to follow up this afternoon.
All right, our assistant principal is going to get involved here. So we just got an email from our assistant principal, Griffin. I spoke with Mr. Henton this afternoon about the issue raised by Mr. Turner and tried to get Mr. Henton's side of the story. Mr. Henton acknowledged that he sent Kira Turner to the office, but characterized her behavior as disruptive. He doesn't believe he did anything wrong and feels he is justified in his application of the discipline policy. Ooh, kind of sounds like Mr. Henton's digging his feet in here.
As promised, you follow up with Mr. Turner, letting him know that upon your investigation, you did uncover some areas of growth for your school and teachers in the areas of effective discipline. You assure him that you will continue to monitor the situation for all discipline policies implemented by teachers moving forward. Mr. Turner states that he is grateful for your investigation and follow-up in addressing his concerns.
All right.
You are in your office Friday after school has let out when you are visited by Mr. Henton.
All right, so we've been waiting to meet Mr. Henton. So of course he comes to our office Friday after school, and here he is.
I had a visit from AP Griffin earlier this week, asking about one of my discipline referrals. I have never had to justify my application of discipline policies before, and I was surprised to be asked to do so. I will not tolerate the disruption caused by a student not being prepared in my gifted class. This has never been an issue. Students love me because I hold them to a higher standard. The parents know this too. I have higher expectations of these kids, and I am just not going to tolerate disruptive behavior in my gifted class.
Ooh.
After Mr. Henton departs, you are left wondering if you should let this incident go or follow it further. Mr. Henton is a popular teacher, and you've only just finished your first month. You're not sure pursuing this issue right now is the best course of action. Well, the week is over. You'll have to return to this issue on Monday.
Okay, time for the weekend.
The following week starts with a scheduled meeting with Mrs. Baldwin, the mother who had issues regarding her students' performance in Mr. Henton's class. But first, a peek at your inbox, and perhaps someone stopping by your office.
I wonder who's going to stop by our office. We get an email. This is from the superintendent again. As we've discussed, along with the changes in the composition of the community, some parents have expressed concerns with classroom grading and student test results. Please investigate and pinpoint any of these discrepancies with teachers, but tread lightly. We are making progress on student performance, and I'd hate to take our eyes off those goals. By the end of the week, please send me an actionable plan for addressing this issue.
You get an email from a colleague who noticed this post on social media and forwarded you a screen grab.
Ooh, so we get a screen grab from Mr. Henton. I remember the good old days when a teacher was given full reign over how to best manage their classroom and how to best meet the needs of students. Say goodbye to autonomy, Waterside teachers. An interesting point right here is when that gets a chuckle out of a group when we're face to face. And I always ask the participants, I'll say to them, how many of you have dealt with a social media post like this with a staff member? And probably 90% of people say that they have. And if it's appropriate, and if I have enough time, I'll ask them to share with one person next to them about what they learned and about their experience, because we know that with adult learners, when we're meeting with them, when they're making connections from the simulation to what they've done in their real life, that's when deep learning happens. Get another email. This is from Ashley, the PTA chair. I forwarded the minutes from our PTA meeting last week. Please note the number of parents who are still addressing concerns about the shifts in our school demographics and how they are being handled. I'd like to invite you to our next meeting to address the increased diversity of the school, as well as the realigned vision and mission for the school. Thanks, Ashley.
Thinking about what you would present to the PTA meeting, what would your key points be?
Ooh, I'm going to ask everybody to go to the chat room or the question area and write down one thing that you would present to the PTA meeting. What's one key point that you would bring up? Ooh, I'm going to start copying some of these. They're good. Ooh, I see somebody lost the video. Sorry about that.
I'm working with it, David.
Okay, perfect. Oh, yeah. Great comments here. I would share the school demographic trend data. That's a fantastic thing, because that is something that people can understand, and it's a great springboard to talk about what you want to talk about. Ooh, excellent options here. Purpose of rich learning for all students. That's right. We need to make sure that we are leading in a way for all learners of our school. Ooh, nice. Talk about the positive challenges here. Ooh, free and reduced lunch populations and percentages in the classes that are offered. That's fantastic. That's right. If we have changes in our demographics, our instruction needs to change as well. Ooh, talk about how the mission is still the same. I think one of, besides ensuring the safety and the emotional, social, physical psychological safety of everybody that they lead. I think as superintendents, one of the most important things that they need to do is to share that the mission of the school has not changed, be a champion of the mission and vision. Embrace diversity because it's a symbolic of our community. That's great. Yep, talk about the opportunities. And I could just keep going on here. These are so good. Thanks for posting all these. Yeah, put the question back on them. If the mission and vision hasn't changed, then what has changed? There you go. So anyway, we could talk about this and we could go on and on and on, but great job. We are going to see what happens next in our simulation.
Well, the lounge is abuzz about Mr. Hinton's social media post over the weekend. I assume you saw it? The one in which he called out interference in his class management? You know he plays favorites. He loves talking sports. And if you're not into sports, you're excluded from the conversation. Word on the street is that athletes in his classes rarely get discipline referrals. But look out for Mr. Hinton today. His favorite team lost yesterday, which I'm sure will be the main topic of discussion in all his classes.
I have some concerns about what's being taught in my son Andrew's social studies class. My son failed Mr. Hinton's last test. And do you know why? Because Mr. Hinton is not covering the material on his own test. Now, at the same time, Andrew is not challenged by Mr. Hinton. It seems a lot of time in the class is spent on things unrelated to teaching and learning, like sports. I confronted Mr. Hinton with that, and do you know what he said? That it really didn't matter for my child in this class, that anything would be too difficult for Andrew, that he didn't want to give him any more work than he could handle. This is totally unacceptable behavior from Mr. Hinton. Now, he may not have high expectations for my son, but I do. This can't continue. I need you to take care of this immediately.
All right, so Mrs. Baldwin has some authentic concerns here.
After meeting with Mrs. Baldwin, you take a closer look at Mr. Hinton's file. You notice that his evaluations are satisfactory, but not stellar. Grades in his general classes are consistently high, but good grades in his gifted class are hard to come by. Oddly, most of his discipline referrals are from his gifted class. Earlier in the year, you popped into Mr. Hinton's class for a quick informal evaluation. You were struck at how much time is given over to discussing recent professional sports games, even with you in the room. Maybe this was a warming up at the start of the school year. If so, it has gone on too long. What is the best course of action?
Yes, we get another decision point. By the way, I've been reading your other posts and questions that you're adding, comments. It's just fantastic work. Thank you for doing that. So now I need each of you to write down your response, and we're going to go through the poll the same way that we've done in the past. So what are we going to do next? Continue to delegate to AP Griffin, number 1. Number 2, begin gathering additional documentation on Mr. Hinton. Number 3, talk to Mr. Hinton. Number 4, prepare a letter of direction noting the 2 parent complaints. Or number 5, ignore this for the time being. 5's a bad answer. Don't choose that one. All right, I'm going to go to the poll here. Ooh, I'm going to switch things up here. I am going to do which option would you not select? So that's the poll that I'm going to bring up next. I think this is a great time to talk about that. So rather than you explaining which one you're going to select, which one's good, I want you to say which one is not good. So take another look at these. Which one is not a good choice? All right, I'm going to launch my poll. There we have it. Oh, Excellent. We already have 65% of people that responded. Oh, good job. Thanks for switching gears so quickly with me. All right. I'm going to close the poll here, share the results. Ooh, which would we not do? Number one was continue to delegate to AP Griffin. So if you would now go into your chat box and you would share with the group, why is that not a good answer? We had 6% of people that would not gather additional information. If you'd be willing to explain why you thought that. 0% of people would not talk to Mr. Henton. Oh, that's interesting. 14%, number 4, is prepare a letter of direction noting the 2 parent complaints. And number 5 was the highest one. Just ignore this for the time being. So I'm going to hide the results right there. And I'm going to switch over to the chat feature. Ooh, this person wants to talk to Mr. Henton without preconceived notions and biased. Totally agree with that. Do not ignore for the time being. Yes. All right. Not 4 because it's too early. I need to speak with Mr. Henton before taking other action. Great. I would not continue to give this to the assistant principal because this is going to be a major issue. And as the leader of the school, you need to take charge. Ooh, this is a good time to talk about that amongst your school leaders. 2 parent complaints, a Facebook post, and anecdotal evidence from observation. The assistant principal and teachers indicated that it is time to talk to Mr. Henton. Yeah, I agree, Shannon. I would talk to Mr. Henton and get a hold of his attitude, creating a negative vibe. Yep. At this point, it cannot ignore, and you must speak with Mr. Henton to completely understand where his thinking is. I feel like ignoring this could make for a huge blow up. Since I'm new, I need to nip this in the bud so people don't see me as weak in avoiding issues. Oh, that's great. This is becoming an instructional issue. Yes. When it gets in the gets in the way of an instructional issue, I totally agree with that. Ignoring this issue would be detrimental to students and Mr. Henton. Yeah, we need to talk directly to him. I'm seeing a lot of people. Ooh, it could be a good opportunity to train the assistant principal. Oh, that's a neat perspective. I like it. Do my homework and collect documentation. Yep. I would take it back from the assistant principal because Mr. Henton will not respond well. Oh, these are so good. I'm gonna read a couple more. I need to get more information, firsthand account, which means I need to be in the classrooms, gather data. Oh, it's a great time for us to talk about the importance of being in the classrooms. If we don't know what's going on, how can we lead well? I'd also get the HR department and give them a heads up that there's a major issue. Oh, great advice. That comes from somebody experienced, I can tell. So the most comments that we had was talk to Mr. Henton. And when I facilitate this in person, that is by far the dominant answer. So thanks for switching gears with me and talking about which ones we wouldn't choose. I think there's just a lot of value, and I wanted to model that for you. So that way, if you are facilitating these, you can use that in your toolbox. So we're going to talk to Mr. Henton, and we're going to see what he says.
What was the rationale for your choice?
Skip that.
You decide to ask AP Griffin to gather some additional information on Mr. Henton's performance prior to having a formal conversation with Mr. Henton. You also speak with some students who note that some of them like Mr. Henton and are fine coasting along in his class, whereas others are eager to learn and feel cheated out of opportunities for real learning.
All right, after speaking with Mr. Henton, AP Griffin reports that execution was not successful. Mr. Henton Mr. Henton was somewhat defiant, saying he's been teaching these kids far longer than any of the administrators have been here, and he knows what the students can and can't handle in terms of material. However, during a brief observation, AP Griffin noted that of the 30-minute lesson in the class, only half of that time was spent on content. The remaining half was given over to the open discussion about sports. The AP also reports that one student slept through a lesson in the general class, and Mr. Hent did nothing. Based on input from other parents, it sounds like many students complain about not getting called on in class, even though participation is part of their grade. In addition, students report that it doesn't matter if they do homework or not. It's not checked and there are no grades. The general class seems to be taught in a way that indicates the knowledge gained is not very useful in real life. Considering the discipline issue in Mr. Henton's gifted class, you recognize that a review of his referral history is in order. You see that referrals are given almost exclusively to students of color, with the exception of those that are involved in sports. Upon further investigation, you notice that athletes are given multiple warnings prior to a discipline referral. These actions seem to be hindering equitable opportunities to learn in his classroom. Considering how Mrs. Baldwin comments about her son's Andrew's experience together with what AP Griffin reported, you see that Mr. Henton is teaching to low expectations in his general classes, which limits students' opportunities to perform their full potential. Considering some of the comments relayed by Ms. Sanchez regarding Mr. Henton's issues with new groups of students, you recognize that Mr. Henton's distance from newer groups of immigrant students may need to be addressed in terms of cultural competency.
How would you open the conversation when you speak to him later in the day?
All right, I'm going to launch our next poll here. So get your answer for 1, 2, 3, or 4. You'll see what I'm doing here is I'm clicking on this more information tab. So number 1, approach Mr. Henton and focus the conversation on his rate of discipline referrals. Number 2, approach Mr. Henton and focus on how he may be creating a challenge to equitable learning opportunities. 3, approach Mr. Henton and ask about how he incorporates cultural competency into his teaching practices. Or number 4, all of them. Approach Mr. Henton and cover discipline, equity, and cultural competency issues. All right, I'm going to launch this poll. I'm actually interested to see what you are thinking. Now, this has 5 choices in case you want to combine one of the 4. Oh, nice. All right. Oh, you're going to be interested in these results here. Show the results. We have number 1, approach Mr. Henton and focus the conversation on his rate of discipline referrals, 14%. Number 2, approach Mr. Henton and focus on how he may be creating a challenge to equitable learning opportunities. Number 3, approach Mr. Henton and ask about how he incorporates cultural competency into his teaching practices. And number 4, approach Mr. Henton and cover all 3, discipline, equity, and cultural competency issues. Fantastic. I see there is a tie between 3 and 4. I love ties because then we can go to the chat room, and whatever I see the biggest theme in the chat room is how we're going to roll between number 3 and number 4. And if you chose number 5, explain what you would have rather seen. All right. I think addressing all together demonstrates how they are all intertwined. Oh, good, Randall. Number 3, the goal of any initial disciplinary conversation should be about coaching towards the outcome we want to see. Oh, great. I like it. Shannon comes with a coaching approach. Always start the approach allowing the teacher to reflect on their own instruction. Oh, great. Because if we just go ahead and we just tell them what to do, I'm not sure there'll be a whole lot of buy-in for that. Oh, can you show the chat? I would love to see other responses. If I knew how to do that, I certainly will. I am reading them.
What I can do is I'll export the chat when we share the recorded version.
Yes. Start with the hard data as a launching point to delve into the larger issues of equity and cultural competence. Yeah, we have a ripe opportunity to do that, don't they? Start with listening first. Oh, that's great. Great, Sharon. Thank you. I think he'll undermine any conversation on cultural competency. He'll say it's a cop-out. Chose number 2 because it puts Mr. Henton to think through his approach to all students. He might not be able to respond to cultural competency as in 3 or 4. Yeah, maybe he's not ready for that. The goal would be to address how all 3 promote equity for students. Oh, I love it. I believe there's an opportunity for all 3 issues. Okay, I'm starting to see a lot of that. That would be awesome. Thank you. Mr. Henton really needs to understand the school's policy and what's non-negotiable. He's not very open. We'll see. The students need to be first. Oh, great one. Cultural competency is not an additional tool. Once you have the lens, it cannot be separated. I agree. So I think I saw most of these in the comments. So that's how I'm going to break the tie. You'll see as a facilitator, you have to decide somehow how to break the tie. Another one, I'll read one more. If you approach Mr. Henton with the topics of discipline, he'll become defensive right off the bat. If you ask him a reflective question like number 3, you will disarm him, and then you will weave in examples of what cultural proficiency is. Oh, wonderful. Okay, we're going to add this. We're going to try to address a whole bunch with him. We'll see how he responds. Later in the day, you discuss the recent issue with Mr. Henton regarding Mr. Turner's daughter in his gifted class. You discuss the impact of discipline referrals on equity in the classroom, and Mr. Henton scoffs. He replies that he will not tolerate disruption or distractions. His class is for students who want to learn, and those are the students he teaches to. He says, if that is inequitable, well, so is the world, and teachers should be ready for the consequences of their actions when they grow up to be contributing members of society.
How will you respond to Mr. Henton?
All right, build on what Mr. Henton has experienced with his own teaching style. Number 2, tell Mr. Henton how misapplied discipline in the classroom can result in inequitable learning opportunities. Number 3, offer an orientation of how low expectations impact student performance. And number 4, focus on addressing the rigor of instruction in his classroom. Those are close ones, so I'll give you a little bit of time. Going to the poll here. Our next question, launching it. The speed of which you are replying from my end is impressive. Great job. All right, I'm seeing a clear winner here. I'm going to close the poll, share the results. Half of you said number 2. Let's go back and figure out what number 2 was. Tell Mr. Henton how misapplied discipline in the classroom can result in inequitable learning opportunities. So rather than going to the chat feature, I want to quick go to the next slide here.
You feel that Mr. Henton wants to do a good job, but he's not even aware of the impact his discipline methods can have on his students' learning. You frame his behavior in terms of fairness. Is it fair for him to refer a student for discipline if that perceived infraction is ultimately insignificant? Is it fair for him to define the same behavior as tolerable for one student or set of students, while it is grounds for discipline for another student or students? Mr. Henton responds that it may not be fair, but as a teacher, he feels it is his job to discipline students how he sees fit, which calls for applying the judgment he has built up over years of experience. After some back and forth, Mr. Henton acknowledges that his judgment around discipline can be misapplied, which can limit opportunities for some students. Elaborate on your response, include.
Wow, you shared a lot with me today. Things that I didn't quite realize were happening in my classroom that were impacting student learning. I want to do the best for every student in my class. Thank you for showing support. I really look forward to working hard and becoming a better teacher.
Oh, I'm so glad we were able to get to that. Now, this brings up a great a discussion point. When I facilitate this in person, about half of the class will be like, no way is that really what he thinks. He's just trying to say what he needs to say to get out of my office. And the other half are like, no, I genuinely believed him on what he responds. And we don't have time to talk about that right now because I'm going to turn it over to Ken Spiro to wrap us up here. But I just wanted to show you that video. I wanted to squeeze that in. So thanks for listening. We'll stay on for a while here, and I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Yeah, Ken, sorry, before you jump in, we had a couple people who wanted to ask some questions. So after Ken's comments, we can, if you want to stay on, we can address those.
I'll stay on as long as people have questions.
That's great. And also, thank you, David. And also, if you can call up the slide for the feedback, so that the simulation does provide summative feedback at the end, which students, participants can reflect upon, which provides the issues that are going on in each scenario, and again, provides another opportunity for discussion. So hopefully in this, and again, we can stay on, but I just wanted to make clear that obviously if this was a smaller group, you could have had everybody, even in this virtual context, everybody's videos could be up in the top bar with the facilitators so that everybody can be interacting together, depending on the size of the group. But again, it can be done this way and have that opportunity for not only the decision making, but also the dialogue back and forth, and relating it to, as Dr. DeYoung mentioned, relating it to the specifics that are going on in your schools and your districts. I did also want to point out that when doing this, think about the value of, now that everybody has a shared experience, right? Everybody knows who Mr. Henton is. Everybody knows each of the, Mrs. Baldwin and Mr. Turner, AP Griffin, and everybody now has a character that has some life to them that can be referred to, because often in our discussions, we're trying to make a point about something we experienced in our buildings, and we start talking about referring to a real person. And some people may know that person, some people may not. And that obviously has some very negative components to it if in fact people know who you're referring to. And therefore this provides a further opportunity for discourse, additional dialogue and bonding that can happen amongst teams relative to issues that are going on, because they have that common reference point, and another way in which the simulations can provide further depth, both from a development perspective as well as communication. And the one last thing is, it is human to want to do the right thing, right? We often strive to do the right thing and what's best, and that often manifests in the simulation choosing the decision that you think is the right one. But you can equally have, and as Dr. DeYoung mentioned in the facilitation, identify the wrong decisions, because sometimes the choices that we put in here are reasonable. What our partner at Gwinnett thought were reasonable choices. We don't want to include obviously right or wrong answers, because those are obvious and therefore no critical thinking would be going on. But this is, since experience is the best teacher and we learn best from making mistakes, this is an opportunity to actually allow participants to try stuff out, because all of the pathways are branched. So you would actually have the opportunity to experience negative consequences, but here it doesn't count other than for learning. And so just bear those things in mind. But thank you all again for participating. I will turn it back to Dr. DeYoung to answer your questions. And also you can see what that relative to feedback and close things out. Do pay attention to the email from Brian in terms of the recording, as well as the access to the Cultural Competence Sim, so you can go and play it yourself, as we are providing access to that. And we very much look forward to your feedback. Thank you all, and all the best. Be safe and healthy, and look forward to being in touch.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, David, we do have a few questions here. Thomas, I've unmuted you if you want to go first.
Okay, thank you. Dr. DeYoung, my university, like many around the country, are currently working in an online format only.
Yep.
I'm used to using simulations in person where I can facilitate the group together, sort of like you did today online, but I'm wondering how to do that. We have to use what the university approves as formats. In my case, we're using a feature called Collaborate Ultra.
Yep.
But downloading something like the simulation, I'm not sure that would work. So do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, great. So I am using this simulation in a fully online class right now where they get a password for a certain amount of time and they experience the simulation asynchronously on their own and then come to the discussion board. And what I do is I have them use a peer-reviewed journal article, which was a gap in our superintendent program, and then they would add a citation from that peer-reviewed article into their post. And if you email me, I'll give you my syllabus on which ones I use and which questions I ask on the discussion board. Now, our platform is Desire to Learn, but and within that we have Collaborate Ultra. So if you're able to, we have switched from Collaborate Ultra to Zoom. So we all have a university-wide Zoom account that I have used, just like GoToMeeting today, to do it synchronously online. Does that answer your question, Thomas?
Yes, but can I follow up?
Yeah.
With Zoom, if you go beyond 40 minutes, there's a cost.
Yes.
I wouldn't have a problem actually assuming that cost, but is it only for the facilitator or would it be for everybody in the room?
Great question. The only cost is for the facilitator with Zoom. So my university paid for us to have a pro account.
Can I answer real quick? From what I understand, Zoom has relaxed that the notification comes up, but they're not charging. So you can continue through it in the current environment. So as far as I've seen, and we've tested this, that with Zoom, the notification comes up, but then you can continue through it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Peter, and then one more after that. Peter, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you for the simulation, Dr. DeJong. I really enjoyed it. My question is relative to, and I know at the very beginning you had a reference on, looked like on cultural competence or cultural practices. But my question is, what theoretical or conceptual framework or tools do you use to implement culturally proficient practices?
Oh, that's fantastic. So in my role at University of South Dakota, I'm usually the chair of 10 active dissertation writers. And in our very first class, we have them write either a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework or a contextual framework that their dissertation would be based on. So I don't have one go-to that I would just flat out recommend. I know Geneva Gay is probably the first author that I would go to. Christine Sleater is probably one of the second authors that I would go to, and I would use one of their frameworks. But I do not have one that I've developed on my own. What I wanted to show you is that this simulation on cultural competency is such a fantastic way to talk about such a tricky subject, because you control all the variables out there and you can talk about quote unquote somebody else's situation rather than it's harder for somebody to just flat out share something that they've learned. So that's where I think the power of simulations comes in.
I definitely agree with you that because it tends to be a sensitive topic, the simulation was an excellent way of getting people to share their perspectives in what I think would be considered a pretty safe place.
Yes.
If I could, I'd just like to add one more reference to your
Yes.
toolbox, and the
Right.
the framework that I use is by Dr. Randy and Dolores Lindsay. They have a book out called Cultural Proficiency Manual for School Leaders, and their framework is actually one that I've used to bring change to my school, and it's also a foundational framework that I'm using in my dissertation study. If you're interested, I'd be happy to have that conversation offline.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, Sharon has a question. I'm going to unmute you, Sharon. Sharon's question was, do you have simulations for superintendents?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sharon. So we have a bank of 30 simulations, and here's the craziest thing that I learned after facilitating these all over the place. It doesn't necessarily matter if they are specific at the district level perspective or the building level perspective. And we actually have some from the counselor's perspective. I have found that it's actually good for teachers to experience from the principal perspective and even the superintendent perspective. And I've done that for like full days, like 2 8-hour days in a row. I just ran teachers through these simulations and they loved them. And they had a new appreciation for what a school leader has to deal with. But specific to superintendent, I would estimate that 10 of the 30 are specific to the superintendency. But I would have no problem having a principal do one from a superintendent or a superintendent from a superintendent perspective. It matters more about like the content, like the topic, than it does which perspective it's from.
The one other thing I would mention is that with the superintendents, in addition to what Dr. DeYoung mentioned, is a superintendent could actually be the facilitator. And so when a superintendent runs it with their teams, it's an opportunity for them to facilitate that conversation. So there's a dual opportunity at that point, which principals can do in their buildings as well. So in terms of the flexibility of this modality, you can embed them into PD, you can embed them into team meetings, you can assign them as assignments, but it's all part of the different ways that you can deploy them relative to achieving your goals from a development, from a kind of connectedness perspective, et cetera. So it's up to the user in terms of how would they best attend to that objective.
Excellent.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. So in the interest of time, we're a little over an hour here. Thank you very much for attending. If anyone has any other questions, we'll hang on for about 5 more minutes. Feel free to use them in chat or raise your hand and I'll unmute you. But I hope you enjoyed the experience, and we'll follow up with the recorded version, as Ken said, as well as the slide deck and some other information. So thank you. Stay healthy, stay sane, and good luck, everyone. Looks like we have a question here from Roberto. I'm going to unmute you, Roberto. Do you have a question?
Hey, Dr. DeYoung, thank you so much for that amazing presentation there. I'm here at county office level here in California, and the presentation style just made me think of how I can infuse this with our new administrators. I'm just curious, there at your university, is cultural proficiency sort of a topic that's interwoven into the program, or is it something that's sort of standalone? Because I'm just thinking of this whole redesign of American schooling process, right? And as Peter mentioned earlier, it's about changing the lens and the way that we approach our work, right?
Yes.
So just trying to see what's sort of the quickest way to put this on the front burner and stop sort of tap dancing around. How do we, because on the critical end is, I think if we focus on the credentialing programs, that there's an opportunity to infuse it there, right? It's harder to try to do it with the already existing educators out there, especially the more veteran staff, right? So just curious about your thoughts on what you guys are doing there, or how are you guys sort of focusing on this topic of cultural proficiency?
Great topic. So what we've decided is that it's in our principal, superintendent, and doctorate work, it is one of our signature pedagogies that we've adopted at the University of South Dakota. And what we realized is we did that maybe about a year ago, and we were bringing in speakers, and we were adding like courses from that perspective, and offering graduate credits for these big time speakers that we were paying thousands of dollars to bring in. And we thought that worked well, but then we realized that, we weren't infusing it into our classes like we could be. And so we're having conversations like, how are we holding ourselves accountable for infusing these into our classes? And, when you're sitting with 8 professors in our ed leadership department talking about it, it makes people uncomfortable, but it's been good. And I'll share one example from earlier this year that I shared with my team already. I was on the schedule to meet with 45 superintendents. I'm not going to tell you where, but these superintendents introduced themselves. It was the beginning of the school year, and they talked about their enrollment. Was it going up or was it going down? And one of the superintendents said, I have 53 new kids this year, but I doubt any of them speak English. And I was like, and there was a few chuckles in the room, and there were a few people that were uncomfortable, but nobody said anything about it, including me, just sitting there. Well, about 20 minutes later, I was the main show, and I was leading this cultural competency, and I just hammered it home on how much our words matter as leaders, and how it matters because it impacts our principals, impacts our teachers, which impacts our students and community. So I didn't choose to share that today in interest of time, but I used this simulation to address an issue that happened in that very same meeting with superintendents. And I didn't shy away from it. And it was super awkward, but it was a good opportunity to hit it head on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's basically what it's going to take, that courageous leadership, right? And I'm just curious, go ahead. No, I was just curious what was happening at the university levels, especially since that's the traditional route of putting out educators, right?
Yeah, yep. So it's included in our theoretical frameworks like we talked about earlier. That's one of the ways for dissertations. And the other way is us into the schools or whenever principals and superintendents gather and leading simulations.
Yeah.
Very
thank
practical.
you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, that's great. We're at the 2:48 mark here. I don't see any other questions. We'll hang out for another minute. But once again, thank you everyone for your attendance and your engagement during the session.